Hillary, how are you?
Hi, I'm so good. So happy to be here. How are you?
I feel it in your voice, and I'm excited to have you as well. This conversation we have, how many times have we rescheduled to try to make this work?
Oh man, I don't know if I want to
I know.
say. It's been a lot.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
Me
What you
too.
do, yeah, thank you. What you do, it's rad. And so, can you start with helping people understand what skyrunning is?
Yeah, so okay, so I would like to say like trail running, right? So I'm a trail runner and I'm an ultra distance trail runner who specializes in sky running. So trail running and ultra running, the main definition, I think people are familiar. Ultra running is anything more than a marathon. Typically the barrier, the entry level is a 50K. It's about 31 miles. And trail running is anything off of pavement, right? It can literally be even like a rail trail, just a crushed gravel path. It's just something that's different than being on the pavement and the asphalt. But I am based in Colorado, Boulder, and I like to add mountains to the mix. So my form of trail running is a bit steeper than most. And that's where kind of sky running, this other specific niche of trail running, kind of gets a little bit even spicier. Sky running is probably some of the steepest and most mountainous terrain that's out there. So a typical 31-mile race, which I do, has about 11,000 feet as a minimum of elevation gain. Kind of I've done a 57-kilometer race, which had about 14,000 feet of elevation gain, and you have to descend those 14,000 feet as well. And they can kind of take all different forms of distances, but it's usually the steepest and most technical and mountainous style of trail running out there.
Okay, so of all the choices that you had growing up, why did you choose trail running, sky running in particular? Like, what led you down this path?
You know, this is so funny because as a kid, like I said, I grew up in Colorado. I grew up pretty much, walking bare feet on a path, out of the camper van that my parents would take my sister and I around the United States. So, I mean,
Oh,
I
wait,
like
wait,
to,
wait. I got to interrupt.
yeah,
So, okay, pause there for just a minute. You
yeah.
and your sister, so older or younger?
She's older.
Okay, and your parents, it sounds a little hippie. It sounds a little adventurous. Tell me about that a little. It's in my mind quickly. I'll,
Yeah.
I'll say how I mapped it is that my parents threw my sister and I in the back of a van, and we traveled across the country when I was probably in like second or third grade. I
Mm.
mean, Hillary, this was a van that didn't have seats. We were in lawn chairs in the back of our van.
Oh my
Like,
gosh, this is
can,
amazing.
yeah, right. It's literally, it was lawn chairs, my sister and I, and we're across the country. And I remember so much of that because it was foundational
Hmm.
to doing it differently, to exploring. And the image of one of those nylon lawn chairs. Do you know what I'm talking about? The
I
really
mean,
bad.
I grew up sitting in the nylon
Oh
lawn
my
chairs that
God.
were like
Okay.
folded
The
under each
folded.
other,
Yes.
and then they get embers in them, and part of the plastic would melt. Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly. Okay. So I did cross country in that. Can you imagine? No seatbelt. I mean, it was different times, right? This is like in 1978 or something.
This is
And so,
amazing.
yeah. Okay. So that flashed quickly for me, but I want to hear your story about this moment in time with your parents.
Well, it's not too different. I mean, my father, they're both, this relates to my story too. They're both university professors. So my father
Okay.
moved
Not
here.
my story. Not my story.
Well, but they're both,
Okay.
my father is British. He moved here from, the dreary London, and he was just enamored with the American West. And so he wanted to explore everything. I think his first purchase in the United States was a pair of cowboy boots. And so he wanted our childhood to be different than what his was. And his was growing up at a boarding school, in the countryside of like rainy, dreary, England. And so that's kind of where we started. I mean, it was, I guess, like not necessarily like the hippie lifestyle. We had like a pop-up trailer that we would go to. I visited almost all of the 50 states, but that was my childhood growing up. Just like I feel like outside, feet in the dirt. I think I took my first steps on a trail, and but then also coming from this background of this scientific background. My dad, we had the summer to do it because he was teaching, he was running his own research lab. My mom also had to get back to that. And so when I was a kid, I wanted to be like them. I wanted to get my PhD and I wanted to be an entomologist. So that's someone who studies bugs because I was enamored with the outside world from a scientific perspective. And that's kind of this curiosity in the physical world is what put me on this trajectory towards pursuing science. But it wasn't until I was in graduate school, actually, in a PhD program for neuroscience and physiology, that I discovered running. I had been an athlete my whole life because growing up in Colorado in the childhood that I had, I'd always used the outdoors as a form of expression and stress relief. But I played tennis in college, but it wasn't until graduate school where I started running and kind of being more time efficient. And, I needed this break to, let my mind breathe, so to speak, to get creative for the science experiments that I was trying to work on, and that it was just a way for me to stay healthy. But the coolest part about this is that this curiosity that I've always had that put me down this path to science is what actually completely switched my trajectory from a career standpoint to pursuing running. And it was because I was curious about where my body could take me. When I first started running, I loved it because I could work so hard at it and I could see that it was leading to, progress and getting better. And then when I started racing, it was this whole other world. Then when I started running on the trails, I discovered this whole world of trail running, which I didn't even know existed. And I, had spent my whole life growing up in the mountains and on the trails. And so this spark of curiosity led me to question, what can I do with trail running? What do I want to do with this? Do I want to use it as a form of expression? Do I want to challenge myself physically? And all those questions were yes. And the coolest part about it was that it led me to rediscover these places that I visited as a kid in, my parents' pop-up camper. And then I was able to re-explore it on my own 2 feet as an adult. And I think the more I leaned into that, the more it became something bigger. And, I would have never have guessed that I would have had, a career as an ultra runner, as an athlete, given my background and what I had spent 25 years of my life doing.
Okay, so let me go through some frames here.
Yeah.
So mom and dad, they want to do it differently. Dad kind of took the lead on trailblazing. You then kind of fast forward, you're out in nature a bunch. You said he didn't want to raise you a particular way, the way he was raised. What did he want?
And this is the really interesting point. And I want to add too, my mom was a big influence in the trailblazing sense. She decided to have kids, but later in life, she was in the Peace Corps, and she actually went to Nepal for 2 years and lived there. And that's how she got her specialty in microbiology and parasitology. And that was at a time when women didn't go places like this by themselves.
So what were the conversations? I ask this often, like what were the conversations around the breakfast or dinner table, or like, let's do dinner. Like, what did you guys talk about?
All science things. I mean, it was so science heavy.
Give me an example though, because it can take so many tones, right? Like very academic, highbrow, and then it could also be curiosity. I heard you mention that word like 3, 4, 5 times. So maybe just twice. I exaggerate sometimes. So like you mentioned a couple of times, was it more curious based or more scientific rigor based?
Yeah. So I think one would be, I couldn't get away with anything, right? Like I couldn't get away with my dad from growing up in the UK. Like if I didn't know something about US history or world history, my dad would just be like, what is this? Like your education is like ridiculous. And so I'd be like, oh my gosh, you feel like you can't so it would, but it's that's academic focused, right? Like knowing your current events, knowing your history, having that shape your future and not being almost, ignorant.
It does not surprise me at all hearing this bit of it, that you were on an academic path. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't surprise me that you figured out, because I can hear that you have like a sequential processing in your thinking pattern, right? There's you follow a logic pretty tightly. So the part I want to pull apart for just a moment is, I don't know if you finished your PhD or not.
Nope.
You did not. So okay. So this is trailblazing again. You
Mhm.
actually let that path go. Okay. We're going to pause that. We're going to come back to that. But you talked about, I had curiosity and I asked myself a set of questions. Can we pull that apart and unpack that? Because I think that is fundamental to what we're probably going to get to later in the conversation. Is about how you've reimagined yourself post, can we call it tragedy?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're pre-tragedy and you're doing a reimagination. So can
Mhm.
I hear how you did that reimagination when things were really good in your life?
Right. And I think I'm a very logical person. I love to plan. I love to go on a linear path. I like to make a plan and stick to it. But for the first time in my life, I was faced at a crossroads, and it wasn't just, a slight left or a slight right. It was a complete 180. And I was torn. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was almost petrified at the thought of pursuing a passion and a dream, which had become trail running. Because as I mentioned, I'd started.
Wait. This is critical.
Yeah.
What you just said is critical. This is what I want to understand from you, because this is how I'm hearing what you just said. I was terrified. That's when you know that it's real. It's not an academic evaluation of where I want to go. It's not an intellectual evaluation. It's like a full embodied experience. Like, oh my gosh, I'm compelled by this thing called running in trails, maybe in mountains for my whole life. But I've got this 20 some year history of my parents influencing and me having authentic interest in fill in the narrative science. So that junction, most people, first of all, never get to that junction. I don't know if you know that. But then if they do, they take the safe route. And that's just kind of, human nature at play is, safety first for most of us. So I
Right.
love this. Can you just talk about that heartbeat? Can you talk about how you nurtured it to actually bring that thing alive and how you took the steps?
Yeah. And I think it became something that I couldn't ignore. Looking back, I think I could recognize steps that I took. But that when I came to this moment of being terrified, I was terrified of this thing that I felt so drawn to. And I was terrified to take the chance, but I was terrified of not taking the chance. And every which way I was scared of, but then at the same time, I was scared of staying in something that I knew my heart was not in it any longer. And so that is the final point. But before then, I can think of it as kind of a slow burn. It first started as when I started doing more trail running and I felt more and more fulfilled, and I kept on wanting to do more of it. So I thought about it as prioritizing things that I wanted to do. So of course, it like science and trail running were really important to me. So it would take up a lot of my time. So I would sacrifice other areas of my life to prioritize these two things. And sometimes it was my social life, right? Like I would just prioritize not going out, getting enough sleep so I could get up and run in the morning before I went to the lab, because I knew that would make me feel fulfilled. But then the more, when it started to come out in a different way, I actually moved out of the city of Denver to be closer to the trails so I could run every morning before I went into work, went into the lab. But then there became this like nagging feeling. And it started, infrequently, where I was like, oh, I'm kind of dreading to go into lab today. But when the frequency of that increased, I knew it was something that I couldn't just ignore and go to, okay, this is just, it's a hard period in work. Like you just got to keep on grinding through it. Like this is grad school. This is what it's meant to be. When it started to become more frequent and that voice and feeling became louder, then I knew it was something that I had to pay attention to. And of course, but I was really compelled to stick on this path because it was something that I had, like you said, 20-year history with, and I didn't know what it meant to want to give give that up. And for the longest time, I would acknowledge this feeling of not feeling motivated in lab and feeling very more motivated on trail. And I had started to race at this point and win and being offered sponsorships, which I wasn't accepting because I wasn't willing to kind of to entertain that. But I think the turning point for me is when I finally let myself just visualize what my life would look like if I decided to not continue down the scientific path and to pursue my PhD. And
Okay.
I would start to research ideas of like, okay, what would this look like if I decided to master out? What would this look like? I started to entertain that idea and see how I felt.
Okay. I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Viore. Whether you're nearing a return to the office or you're continuing to work from home, I know that for me, as I'm experiencing the hybrid model, one thing that won't be changing for me anytime soon is my affinity for wearing Viore clothing wherever I go. I love what they've done. So Viore makes incredibly soft, comfortable, and versatile clothing. And it can be used for just about any activity like running or training or yoga, but it's also great for lounging and weekends and, just relaxing. So everything is designed to work out in, but it doesn't look or feel like workout gear. And they've got you covered whether you're looking for men's or women gear. You've got to try the Ponto short. It's my favorite by far. My whole family and the Finding Mastery team is loving them. So they've got a special offer for us, 20% off your first purchase. So give yourself some of the most comfortable and versatile clothing on the planet. Punch over to vioreclothing.com/finding mastery. Just to be clear, there's no code on this one. All you've got to do is visit that link and your discount will be automatically applied at checkout. Again, that's vioreclothing.com/finding mastery for 20% off. That's Viore, spelled VUORI. vioreclothing.com/finding mastery. And Finding Mastery is also brought to you by Joovv. Now, when it comes to technology geared towards human flourishing, Joovv is one of my favorite companies. They are leading the way when it comes to red light therapy, and it's something I use nearly every day for my home, and they are absolutely on it. So what they're doing is they're utilizing red and near infrared light to stimulate the mitochondria in your cells. What that eventually does is it helps it produce more core energy and in return, boost performance and recovery as well. So there's been some interesting research where red and near infrared light are involved in supporting mental acuity, better sleep, healthy skin, and those are just a few common benefits that are in the research. And so what I love about what Joovv's doing is there is natural benefits that come from red and near infrared light. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, listen, here's a way to get that stuff in without getting exposure to sunlight. Obviously, sunlight has some great properties, but it's also got some harmful ones as well. So what I want to encourage you to do is go learn more about the benefits of light therapy and also check out Joovv's next generation of devices at joovv.com/finding mastery. The way you spell it is JOOVV.com/finding mastery. And you'll also get access to an exclusive discount when you use that link. Again, it's Joovv, JOOVV.com/finding mastery. And with that, let's jump right back into our conversation. Tell me about the imagery and the visualization. How was it? Did you go train yourself like formally on it, or did you just close your eyes and use your imagination? Did you do something else?
Yeah, I wasn't like trained in visualization, right? But I mean, in a PhD program of neuroscience, even though I was studying more biochemical, like pathways, right, and mechanisms to disease, I still understood the power of the brain and the power of visualization and thinking your way through problems. I think we use visualization more than we think we do, even if it's not formalized training. But I would literally run this experiment on myself. Like I would say, okay, one day you're going to pretend that like it was normally on a weekend when I didn't have to go into lab, that like this, this was my life, that this is what I had to prioritize for the day, this being trail running and this lifestyle. Or I would do this when I was at a race over, a weekend when I was traveling to go there. And, I would visualize and try to picture my life on how I would structure my day and weeks if I didn't have to go back to lab on Monday morning. And the biggest thing with that is I would journal about it. I've always been a fan of journaling and writing things down. I think that's my scientific background. But the biggest thing that I would examine and write down was how I felt. I'm a big fan of Oliver Sacks, and he would always do these experiments. And he was a early psychologist, and he would do these experiments on himself, and he would write notes on how he would feel. And I think that is scientific observation, even if it's not, it can seem a little bit fluffy in the science because you want like these hard answers, but that's what I would do.
Yeah, super influential on neurology meets psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, point taken is that you would use a process from him, and take me back to that, the process that you're using.
Right. So I would just visualize what I would want my life to look like. But the main thing that I would record is how I felt. And it's so hard because for me as a hard scientist, as a chemist, I like black and white answers. I like, okay, this is the reaction and this is not the reaction. There's no in between. But the beauty of neuroscience and the irony of me in a neuroscience program as someone who can be so, black and white, right or wrong, is that the beauty of the brain is that we don't really understand the majority of what's happening in it. Mm-hmm. And that to me, it gave me permission to explore these other areas in my life and give importance to them because they made me feel fulfilled. And that is what life is about. And I finally was able to make more steps towards pursuing this career that was a complete 180 from what I was doing, and have the courage to face that fear of the unknown because I saw the benefit of pursuing a life that made me feel a certain way and feel fulfilled, even if there was a chance of failing altogether.
I love all of this for so many reasons. One is from a logical stepwise approach. You said, okay, I'm going to invest in a best practice to understand this experience that I'm having. I'm terrified. And I'm not quite sure if you're terrified of failure or you're terrified of letting go, going and failing, or letting go and letting down. And so letting down your family, letting down the early dreams you had. Let's pause that for a minute. But then what you did is that you used a best practice of imagery. Then you added to it by describing your feelings, and you wrote them down, which made the invisible visible. So just to calibrate, emotions are physiological, and feelings are the psychology of those physiological events. And what's really interesting is that your interpretation, whether non-conscious, meaning automatic, or conscious, meaning that you're actually aware and processing, is the filter that influences the emotional response and the psychological response to the emotions, the feelings. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to try to suggest that it's a top-down approach, like there are bottom-up experiences, meaning we feel emotions that make sense of it. And oftentimes the way we interpret something is what drives the whole thing. Okay, not to get in the weeds, but you made the invisible, which is feelings, visible, so that now you made it concrete. And then I'm imagining what that did for you is it decreased the overall anxiousness because you had something to actually put your arms around from a visual context at least and say, oh, this is what's happening. And I want to make an informed decision to go toward the thing that I love feeling a certain way. Does that sound close so far?
Yeah. And it sounds incredibly close, but you put it in such a succinct way. It seems like I was, I had done this before, but this is the first time in my life that I had ever experienced this. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to figure this out in real time. So, as I'm describing it or you're describing it, it might seem very straightforward, but this period for me took about a year.
Okay. Yeah, that is a long time to process. Now, looking back, so I'd love for you to respond to this. Don't look back, maybe, but just respond to this. Living a life with passion. Okay, so this is at some crux here, making the decision to go towards trail as opposed to formal education. And I just love the artistry of trailblazing and carving a path. And like, I love all of that that's nuanced inside of this dilemma in your life. And I wonder how you would respond to the path of living with passion is not rooted in only doing the thing that brings you passion, but making a fundamental decision to live with passion anywhere and everywhere you go. So I'd love if you could respond to that, because what I heard you saying was kind of the opposite, is that I naturally felt passionate, alive, awake on the mountains running. And so I'm just going to go to that because that's the easy path for feeling a certain way.
And I'd like to add to that is that I felt this natural passion in pursuing science. I've always been.
You had that as well.
I had it as well. So I felt, oh my gosh, am I going to be giving something up? But I think the point for me is going towards, obviously any path that you choose, there's going to be something that you don't like about a certain job. But it's about being able to feel more fulfilled in daily life. And I felt that weighing more on the trail side of things if I were to pursue a career, that I had thought I was going to pursue my whole entire life.
And would you, like, as a forcing function, when you're using your imagination, were you imagining yourself 10 years in the future? Like, if you were an esteemed, formally educated researcher or an esteemed, trailblazer, trail runner, sky runner, like, did you use like a 10-year out or a 5-year out, or how did you do the imagery to get to the clarity?
For me, it was actually even more short-sighted than that, because at this point, even when I had rolled the dice and decided to pursue trail, I couldn't support myself fully by just racing as a semi-pro athlete. I knew that I would have to get another job. And so the whole point, I mean, sure, like there was this idea of 10 years down the road, if I was able to do this full time and have sponsors that could support me as a more full time. But I did it a year down the road, is that if I don't want to use the word wasted, but that was the word that came to mind. If I wasted another year in graduate school feeling this way, I felt that life was too short to waste another time going into the lab to waste, a year of my life of doing something that I felt like I was supposed to do, as opposed to doing something that I feel like I was made to do.
That's important, because it's going back to that fogginess of how you're making the decision. Were you afraid of letting go and letting down? Either dad, mom, family tree, legacy, your dreams, whatever. Or were you more afraid of going and failing?
I think at first I was afraid of letting down. I was afraid of letting down my family, letting down myself. But then I don't think that that's a good enough reason. And that's why I continued asking myself the question and letting myself continue to visualize this potential career change, because I didn't feel like that was a big enough decision to shape my life. If I was afraid of letting other people down, and then I was, then effectively, keeping myself prisoner in this decision and this lifestyle that I didn't feel completely fulfilled by. That's why I allowed myself to keep asking the question, and why eventually I decided to pursue it is because, sure, I was afraid of failing. I mean, I'm a perfectionist. I don't want to fail. But if anything taught me in the lab, like I learned some of my scientific breakthroughs were learned from the failure of experiments, and the best discoveries in scientific history were learned from failure. And, that can seem like a very easy thing to say. It's very different in practice because it's your life. But I thought that I just had one chance to do it. And I think I was more terrified of letting the opportunity slip away than I was at trying and failing.
And so was the decision more about reducing the failure or the terror, or increasing the vibrance and the excitement of life? Where were you at this stage? And I want to know the question that you're asking, because maybe I missed it, but you said I kept asking the question, and maybe it's really obvious.
Oh,
So can you
yes.
answer both of those for me?
Yeah. So I kept asking this question to myself. I mean, I think it was rooted in what if, like, what if I decided to pursue this path? What's the worst thing that can happen? And of course, the worst thing that I would answer to myself is, you fail. You won't make it. You're not good enough at being a professional athlete to do this full time. And then that brings about ridicule and self-doubt and all of these things. So I'd ask those questions. But for me, it was all about increasing the vibrancy and the richness of life and the experiences that I know are incredibly valuable. I mean, this goes back to my childhood traveling. I mean, even traveling out of the state of Colorado and experiencing a different national park, those moments shaped me. And they shaped me throughout my whole entire life. Even before I was at this pivotal moment, traveling, I decided to travel and study abroad. And I could see the value of these experiences and how that wasn't, measurable in, the sense of academia that we have today. But those were just as, worthwhile. And they shaped me as a human being and as a scientist, and as an intellectual. And so for me, it was all about maximizing that. And I told myself, even if it was for just a year, there's a whole lot I can accomplish in a year and learn from and become a better person. And then from there, I'll make a new game plan.
Okay, that's a good twist. Okay, that's a really interesting twist. And so, the reason I'm kind of drilling down here is because I think all of us have a fundamental decision to make. And part of this decision is either I'm going to orientate my life towards approaching success or avoiding failure. And it started with avoiding failure for you, but it swung to approaching success. And it is a micro decision that we're faced with every decision. However, it becomes a fundamental first principle to choose one or the other. And it sounds like you're saying, it is about approaching success as opposed to avoiding failure as a first principle.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think maybe I didn't know that at the time, but then it's kind of like a snowball effect, is that the more I made that decision to not make decisions because I was avoiding failure, but towards reaching success, it became easier for me to make those micro decisions, later on and continue to do so.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So you make the decision, and anywhere in the decision to go for it, did you imagine that you might fall off something from a very high place? Or was it more like I might turn an ankle? Like, what is the most common injury? And I'm obviously setting up the next part of our conversation. The most common injury is probably something to do with overtraining,
Yep.
right? And rolled ankles and maybe some knee stuff.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Running injuries, right? It's like you fear that if you start to run a lot, especially ultra distance races and on trail, you twist an ankle. You have problems with like hips or, anything that happens with like your knees. It's usually like a hip imbalance. Just overuse injuries, that's always the main concern. No way did I think that, falling a tremendous distance would ever be, a possibility.
Are you okay to talk about it? Like to bring that story, that experience alive without, I'm assuming it was traumatic, but I don't know that. Are you okay to talk about it?
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about what scares us, what makes us feel human, what, we don't want to talk about. It's been an important process to allow me to heal. It doesn't mean it becomes any less difficult, but yes, I think because every time I talk about it, it allows me to heal from it, I think.
Okay, let's do it. Take me right into the morning of that day.
Yeah, so I do want to give a little bit of a background. I mean, we talked about skyrunning, right? And so once I made this decision to go into, trail running professionally, take a chance, I started racing in Europe on the international stage, and I started having some grand success. In 2015, I actually, when I decided to earn my master's degree, I defended my master's thesis and I traveled over to France for my first international race and I placed third amongst a really strong international field. And I remember that feeling of just being like, I made the right decision. Like, even if this lasts for a year, like this is what I need to keep doing. And so I structured my life that way. I got another job teaching at a small college. And then every year I would travel to Europe and race on the Skyrunning World Series now, instead of the US series. And it became one of my goals to win the World Skyrunning Series. And in 2017, I was doing it and I was ranked number 1 in the world. I was having an incredible season. And I had on my race calendar this iconic race. It was called the Humperokken Sky Race. It's in Tromsø, Norway. It's a race.
I know right where that is.
Right? Really?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Oh my God.
This is insane.
Yeah, it's too much. Yeah. No. Yeah.
It's too much. It's meant to be.
Where exactly is this? What's the terrain like?
So it's really far north. It's in the Arctic Circle. The race happens in August and you literally have midnight sun. So it's just this, it's in the Arctic. But in Norway, the trail running there is next level. It's granite. You're at sea level, like, running across fjords. But then when you run on these mountains, they rise vertically, 3,000 feet, but straight up. And this race, which Kilian Jornet and Emily Forsberg put on, some two, icons in the trail running community. It's a very technical race. And so technical that there's ropes, you're sliding down some snowfields. You have to work through this like third class terrain, which, you're hiking, but putting a hand down to like stabilize yourself as you're kind of climbing up this ridge. And this ridge is called Humperokken Ridge. It's a very famous ridge, as you can see from the town of Tromsø. And it looks like a dragon, like rising from the fjords. And you can see this, like the peak in the distance. And this is about the halfway point of the race. And so, like I mentioned, I was winning the Skyrunning series. And so even a poor performance at this race, I had one more race left. It wasn't going to do anything for my ranking. And I was there to just enjoy it because I love using running as a means of exploration. And I had never been to Norway, never been to this part of the world. And so I was just taking it all in. And I remember race morning, just feeling tired, but feeling excited to be there. And I remember feeling a bit homesick. I think I remember having a conversation with my mother like the week before, because this was like the last race before I traveled back home to do my final race of the season. And, she's like, oh, I wish I could be there. Like, it's got to be beautiful. Like, just go out there and enjoy it. And so that's kind of the energy that I started the race with, is that I'm going to use it for what I love the most, using running to explore. And as I kind of got into the race, I was feeling better. I was feeling excited, like the competitiveness was flowing. And as we got to the ridge, the Humperokken Ridge, and the technical part, which I enjoy the most, it changed in an instant. And the last thing I remember is I saw a friend of mine, a photographer, who was waiting for me to take my picture as I rounded this corner. And he calls me Smiler because I'm always smiling even when I'm in pain. And I remember saying, hi, Ian. And then he's like, just smile for me big around this corner. And as I crossed the corner, and I remember stepping on a rock, and 1 minute I was running, and the next, the horizon literally had flipped on its head. And then the world went into slow motion, and I realized that I was falling. And I remember just hearing my own voice. And I remember me telling myself to take a deep breath, that this was it, that you're going to die, but do your best to stay calm, and it'll all be over soon.
Okay, I want to take a quick little break here to talk about Sakara. Feeling your best is intimately connected with what you eat. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine, and they are on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you tools that you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. Their chef-crafted meals are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping you boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, give you that glowing skin that you're looking for even. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door. The Sakara shop is stocked with wellness essentials to help you create a body where you feel strong and vibrant in. Like their best-selling Metabolism Super Powder. It's awesome. They've got plant protein bars that are great. They've got a detox tea that is phenomenal. And they've got the newest functional snack. It's a Super Seed Plus nut blends. It's awesome. And so right now, Sakara is offering us 20% off your first order when you go to sakara.com/findingmastery or enter the code findingmastery20, findingmastery20 at checkout. So how do you spell it? Sakara. Sakara. Sakara.com/findingmastery to get 20% off your first order. That's sakara.com/findingmastery. And Finding Mastery is brought to you by Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker cuts through the noise by analyzing your blood, DNA, lifestyle, and fitness trackers to provide you with a personalized, science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, how to age, how to perform better in your life. And that is my favorite part. They don't just give you data. They actually turn that data into useful information and provide you with nutrition and lifestyle actionable steps that you can take to live your life well. If you missed the recent Finding Mastery conversation with Inside Tracker founder and chief science officer, Dr. Gil Blander, I hope you'll check that out. We take a deep dive on longevity and discuss different strategies for living a longer, higher quality life. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering us 20% off their entire store. So if you're interested, this is a great opportunity to get started. Just go to insidetracker.com/findingmastery. That's insidetracker.com/findingmastery for 20% off. And with that, let's jump right back into the conversation. When you tell the story, what's happening? Like I'm just watching and listening and you're changing as you're telling it.
Changing what? My demeanor?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's still, I mean, it feels like it happened yesterday.
Okay.
It's still a dream that I have. Like the falling dream. I think many people have that, but it's visceral. It's really real. I can almost like feel the feeling of falling and like hearing my words in my head.
What is associated right around that? Is it fear, sadness? There's another narrative that encompasses it. And what is that part of the story?
It's a defining moment in my life. Of my life is different from this point on. It's just that this one instance and my life is completely turned on its head. And it's another crossroads. And so every time I describe this story, it just represents that in my life, right? I mean,
yeah, I'm on record saying there's no such thing as a defining moment, and you're making me, you're making me rethink that right now as you're talking about it. So, okay, keep going, please.
Yeah, and so, and to be honest, like at first, there had to be a period of time in my life where I couldn't tell this story without, bursting into tears because it's still that real.
And that's not the case now. Is that right? Or do you still have connection to the emotional part of the experience?
Oh, absolutely.
And where is it in your body when you tell the story?
Shortness of breath, like I get tense. Almost like that feeling of like, you're bracing yourself for impact. Yeah, I know that feeling all too well.
Oh yeah. Okay. So then what are you doing right now to manage it?
I think, well, breathing is an important part because I think if I get tense, I tend to not breathe. So I have to take time to take a deep breath. I'm standing right now because I feel like that helps me stay a little bit more grounded. And I think I try to use my senses. So like the breath, I think that's also a feeling, but like grounding myself. And then I like to touch. So
Yeah,
keeping,
it would make
yeah.
sense because you weren't able to touch anything in that
Mhm.
moment. It was the grasping, the empty hand grasping. And so, um, what do you say to yourself when you're reliving it in a micro dose way, like telling the story? What are you saying to yourself to manage yourself in this moment?
I think in telling it, like I said before, I think telling the story is therapeutic
Hmm.
because obviously I know what happened. Um, but every time, every time I tell it, I understand, although I don't remember every aspect of it, I I'm trying to come to terms with how intense this accident was, how extreme it was, and yes, how lucky I am to have survived, but then also trying to draw upon this wisdom and this strength that I had, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. Um, because I feel like why didn't I not panic when I was falling? But instead, I clearly remember my own voice telling me to stay calm. That although I thought this was it, that, stay calm, it'll all be over soon. Like, just what I see in that is just like relax, and kind of accept the reality of the situation, but still, fight like hell to survive. And I feel like every time I tell the story, I'm reminded of that strength. And I think that's therapeutic.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay. And you're doing something that this is the part I'm getting at, and I want to finish the story because it's just getting started. But the part that you're doing right now is the part of the story um, that most people don't focus on because part of the story is I came through it. Yes, we're going to learn all about it, but you're living it right now based on the tools that you're using to manage, let's call it high stress. Right? Like high stress is totally relative, right? But it's stressful from an emotional standpoint, reliving it, so retelling it, and your management of it is part of what you learned. And I'm watching it and listening to it, and that's the part that, like, I'm like, okay, how's she doing it? Oh, she's breathing, she's grounding, she's using tactile sensations to remind herself that she's here right now. And what is she saying? What is she saying to herself? Oh, relax. Just the same thing you said at that moment. Okay. All right. I love this. Sorry. Okay, keep going.
No, it's great because I think I wasn't able to learn all of these things until and able to unpack all of it until afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, and so as I was falling, I do remember several of the impacts, and it's more of just like I remember the sounds, I remember the rustling and grabbing for rocks and kind of the franticness. But then as soon as I was in the air again and falling, which is not a good sensation in itself, I hate the feeling of falling, but that calmness would return to me, and that was on repeat until um, sometime when the next time I came to, there was someone next to me who initiated the rescue, the subsequent rescue.
How many feet did you fall?
150.
Hmm. With a series of violent collisions, it wasn't just a free fall. There was violent collisions on the way. How long were you knocked out?
Uh, I don't know the duration of that. I do know that, I was very lucky. because it happened during a race. So someone was able to see me. There was a racer who we had been exchanging positions, and he had seen me fall. And so I was unconscious the time from when I fell to when he caught up to me, and he was able to scramble down the 150 feet to reach me. So several minutes. But I mean, I do want to add, and this is something that it sounds, harsh, and it sounds, awful to say, but it's something that reminds me of how serious this was that this person, Manupar, who came down to me, he didn't even check for vitals. He thought that he was recovering a body. He thought that a fall like that would have killed me. And I asked him this 2 years later when I saw him again. But it wasn't until he was moving me from the edge that he actually felt my chest rise, and then kind of initiated the rescue operation.
Wow. So you're in bad shape.
Yeah.
Okay. When the official rescue unit got there, what were they looking at? Or actually, I'm missing a step. What did he do for resuscitation?
Right. So I think once he realized I was breathing, I was cut badly. He was trying to hold some of the cuts in my legs shut because I was bleeding a lot. He was trying to secure me because it was clear that my back was broken. So he was trying to secure me in a way that I wouldn't move, because at this point I had woken up and I was in pain and I was kicking my legs. And then the world at that point, I just remember it pulsing with pain. And so I was kind of going in and out of consciousness just because it was so painful. And from that moment, it's a bit of a blur, but obviously there's other people that came to the scene. The helicopter rescue was called with the race director, Killian Jornet. He came down there. And from there, they couldn't land a helicopter because it was on a ridge. So they had to lower the doctor to the ridge. He had to come down to me. And then I do remember them putting something up my nose, which I was told is a painkiller, but it didn't really help. And then, them getting me onto a helicopter, like the cot, and then getting me up, which was terrifying because I felt like I was falling all over again as they were bringing me up to the helicopter and taking me to the hospital. But
And were you in and out of consciousness, or were you once you came back, you stayed conscious?
I don't remember it as a stream of
Okay.
consciousness. I remember coming in and out.
Okay. Yeah. And do you remember part of your narrative at that point to yourself?
Well, part of it was, I do remember one part when I was in pain and like kicking my legs. I do remember one part of thinking like, okay, I'm not paralyzed. And then it was just more of when the pain would come of just to get like to have it stop being so painful. But I do remember that specifically. And then the other specific moment was when I was finally in the helicopter and I saw the doctor. I asked him if I was going to be okay. And then, I think I was not conscious again, but that was the first moment, like when I felt like I was safe and going back to the hospital. Like that's the first time that I, was trying to, I thought more long-term, I think, because in the immediacy of the accident and the recovery, I was thinking more short-term, because I thought I was dying the whole time.
Oof. Yeah, just to pull out an insight really quickly is that when we're in pain, it is normal to look outside of us to see if we're actually going to be okay or if we are okay. And which is what you did, is you looked to the person who was the expert in that moment and said, am I going to be okay? Which is totally normal. And where it becomes unhealthy is when we're not addressing the pain that we can address, call it emotional, fill in the blanks. It could be physical as well. And we're chronically looking outside to see if we're okay. Sometimes people are looking to social media to see if they're okay. They're looking to people that don't even know them, people in an audience, to check in to see if they're okay. And so what you just shared is a natural reflex. And it is for those moments that it's that reflex. I'm a mess. Am I okay? Is this going to work out? Please, give me some insight here. And, the thoughtful person is going to say, yeah, we're going to manage this. You're going to be fine. Right. I'm sure it was something along that lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. But you were not fine.
No. I was alive, but at that point, still kind of assessing the injuries. And so I do remember, going to the hospital, then losing consciousness again when they kind of roll me into the CAT scan to see if I had internal bleeding and if my skull was fractured and to see how many bones were broken. And then when I came out of that, I remember the doctor telling me how surprised she was that I didn't have a fracture of my skull, that I had no internal bleeding, certainly bruising, but nothing was ruptured, and that I hadn't broken my legs miraculously enough.
Wow. So, and what was the damage in total?
The damage was 14 bones. So I had broken both of my wrists, both bones. I had broken both feet, so a couple bones in each foot, 5 ribs, and 2 points in my back. And I was cut up. I was in really bad shape. I think both of my legs were just completely covered in band-aids, and I had obviously cuts on my head, but my skull wasn't fractured. I don't remember how many stitches I had, but I remember they had to staple my head because some of the cuts were so big.
Okay. And then obviously you had a concussion, if not multiple.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So where do you go from here? Your whole life was dedicated toward this thing. You felt great joy and happiness, and now here you are with what you had planned on and what you had, in some respects, maybe taken some for granted, that, I'll be able to run tomorrow, which I'm saying to myself right now, it's a sloppiness of how much I think we take tomorrow for granted. So here you are. First, psychologically, how do you approach this? Is it devastation, depression, overwhelmment? Is it fighter? Is it acceptance? I'm just giving some words. There could be anywhere in between.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's honestly a little bit of a mix of everything, and it depends on who you are, what you land on first. For me, I would have thought fighter right away, but I landed on despair because at this point, I never had broken a bone before. I had, taken a chance on this life, and I had felt the most fulfilled I had felt ever in my adult life. And I honestly was in denial too. I think I was on so many painkillers in the hospital. I didn't really come to terms that the accident was me until, 2 days later, when my mom shows up in the hospital room in Norway, just, crying and grateful to see me alive. I would say that I was surprised how quickly I could fall into a depression so deep and vast, and how important it was to have people around you to not let that happen. I think it was it seems like quickly, but I think the first light of the kind of fighting fire happened on day 5, when finally a nurse looked at me and said, "You have to fight. You can't sit in this hospital bed and let your life slip away." She's like, "It starts now, and you have to make that choice." She didn't make it for me, but she she, she kind of provided the ignition and the fuel, and I just had to get the match lit. And that match happened the next day, where it was as simple as literally moving from my hospital bed, which I hadn't been able to move from, to then having breakfast in the chair literally right next to me.
From being literally a world leading athlete in your sport to the next, still making goals, feeling the despair, having a cool little spark that you talked about, or the catalyst to say, no, you need to fight. And you're like, okay, right, mini goals.
Right.
Yeah. When you look back and you put together, because I know that you have written and done deep thinking around this. And when you put it together and you're thinking about people who are going through radical change in their life, when they are scared, when they're overwhelmed, and life is fundamentally different for them. And this could be people right now that are going through so much in our modern experience: loss of job, loss of loved ones, loss of future, lots of autonomy, loss. How do you share a set of best practices to help people through that process?
So for me, it's about perspective. And I learned this early on in being in my scientific training, that if you zoom out and you try to take a step back and look at the problem as a whole, it can seem insurmountable. I mean, that's exactly what I was experiencing when I was injured and I had no idea what steps I had to take to reach this goal of, would I run again? Could I run again? Did I even want to run again? So if I took a step back and it seemed impossible, I didn't know how to get there. But if I zoomed in, and I kept zooming in, this idea of mini goals is something that was incredibly helpful. And sometimes, depending on how I was feeling, it's zooming in as close to getting through each hour, linking together certain hours of a day. If it was painful, or I just didn't really know how to get through it, or one day at a time, a week at a time. I think as a healthy athlete, I had taken for granted this idea of a training block, breaking down my year in, months or blocks of training to prepare for a certain race that was X number of months away. So I would do, this training during this 3-month block, blah, blah, blah. But, I couldn't do that anymore. But if I kept on zooming in and, I had this magnifying glass and breaking down even my day into certain goals, it allowed me to see that progress, and then to actually feel accomplished. Like, I got through this hour. This hour was really painful. I got through this hour without taking extra pain medication, or I got through my PT session, which was an hour long. I got through whatever that goal is that I had to do, or, a week at a time. That's something that really helped me to not only see progress, but appreciate the progress, and then to see how that could lead to something bigger.
And when it comes to putting yourself in risk environments, or even putting yourself dramatically back on that trail, or a trail that smells or looks or has a hint of steepness to it, you can talk about generally or specifically, how are you managing that now?
So it's a great question. And it's, I think people are familiar with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And so post-traumatic stress disorder, and that takes many forms, and it can be, from just a single stressor. It doesn't have to be a huge stressor in your life. But something that can bring you back. And it's usually associated with, hearing something and bringing back those feelings, or, feeling something and bringing back an experience. And so it's something that has continued. I continue to work through it. It's been 4.5 years since this accident. And, sometimes there's moments that still bring me back to that moment. I remember early on, I was running in a local trail here in Boulder. It was a flat trail, wasn't anything steep to it. And there was a rescue operation, kind of the practice. They were practicing, using a helicopter off kind of in this field where I was running. And I remember just hearing the sound of the helicopter, and I just immediately fell to the ground and started crying. I had to use the physical kind of sensations. Like I was telling myself I was okay, like, and, not judging myself for it and saying like, this is honestly a normal response. Cause it was the first time I'd heard, a helicopter that close to me since the rescue. But it's, for me, then it kind of can be zoomed out into this concept of fear. If I'm in kind of a fearful situation, like on a rocky ridge, if I'm trying to practice, some terrain that might bring me back there, of using techniques. And usually for me, it's things I say in my mind to keep me calm and focused in the current moment, like not thinking in the future or thinking in the past, but being immediately in the present, which allows me to, I visualize it as, I see fear as this big scary monster. And instead of letting him control where I go, I can acknowledge fear, and he still is scary, but I can walk past him without letting him kind of deter me or scare me off of my path. And I feel
that's
like
fun. Yeah, that's really fun. And you're also using deep focus on the here and now. So like listening to your breathing, or feeling feeling the rock under your foot, or foot strike maybe, or arm strike, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, bringing myself back to the current moment, and I think the easiest way to do that is relying on your senses. That's something for me that helps keep me focused and in the here and now. Because if not, it's really easy to get drawn into how this happened to me, so therefore I can't do this, or living in the future of saying I'm afraid of this happening again. So yeah.
So no joke. I don't want to zoom over this because we kind of skipped a few steps, which is you're in the hospital making micro goals. You're out of the hospital into PT making micro goals, and you're staying in that approach success. Let's call it the athlete mind of getting better. And you don't have to be an athlete to have that mind, but just shorthand it. And then all of a sudden you're back running, so there's a gap in there. Like, I want to say congratulations. I don't think that's the right thing to say, but it's like me wanting to acknowledge like, oh, damn, like falling from 100 and some feet, banged up as you can get. And here you are. And so like, there's a celebration here somewhere. It's not for me to celebrate it, but like, I just want to honor that. Pretty rad.
Well, I mean, thank you. But I want to push back and say that I'm not special in this recovery. Sure, like this incredible thing happened to me. For me, it's a, this defining moment. And I guess I challenge you on that. It can be maybe a pivotal moment is the more correct word. Like life is not linear. It's full of twists and turns. And this was one of those turns for me. But I'm not special. I feel that, and I want to push back, and I want to use anyone hearing this story or my story, that this allowed me the opportunity to discover strengths that I already possessed. It just allowed me to uncover them. They might have been, buried deep down somewhere inside of me, but this is what allowed the opportunity for me to uncover them and use them, and then to continue using them throughout my life. And so I hope that it encourages other people who are challenged. They don't have to fall in 150 feet. I really don't recommend it, but they can use whatever pivotal moment they are at in their life and use it as an opportunity to set those mini goals, to discover how incredibly strong they are as people, and how resilient we are as a human race to make it to that next step and then to set bigger goals.
I think you're working from one of my first principles as well, which is everything that somebody else, but everything you need is already inside you. And how do we discover that? A lot of hard work. And that hard work needs to come for or from somewhere. And oftentimes it comes from pain. And so a big part of my job is to help people face their pain, to feel their pain, to acknowledge their pain. I call it the dragon, to meet their dragon, get to know their dragon, then exercise the dragon, and then have a relationship with it. And so that it's the dragon, the scary monster in your case, right? Like the dragon is not either so dormant, locked in a cage that it's forgotten how to breathe and have fire, and or it's so scary that we're afraid to get near it. But to actually like, okay, this is my suffering, this is my pain, I can have a relationship with it. And then from there comes this upspringing of adaptations and eventually leads to these micro choices, which leads to micro actions, which leads to, call it mini goals. And then eventually over time, when you stack and stack and stack and you start to optimize towards the human you want to be, that you know you are capable of, but it's been dormant because of the pain has been blocking it. The dragon's been protecting something, right? Is that I'm reminded of a second first principle, which was introduced to me by a special warfare operator, a dear friend of mine, Pete, who says, he says it kind of glibly, and he says, Mike, people have no freaking clue how much they're capable of. No clue. I saw it all day long for years, helping SEALs become, Navy warfare operators become, because people have no clue until they get really tested and pushed. So, yeah. So anyways, there's a couple first principles that we're relating to.
Yeah. I love that so much.
And I love that you're also connected to the dragon as well.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
totally. The dragon. It's awesome. Yeah.
So, all right. So there's some best practices that we've been talking about that have been meaningful to you. And I love the fact that you're like, I'm not special. Well, you actually are. You're doing some really special. We're all special in our own ways, right? Not everyone gets a trophy, but we're all very special. So like, let's zoom way out and say, if there was one or two or three things that I could pass on to folks to become their very best, what would you say those practices or insights or perspectives would be?
So one thing I would say is the more you practice being uncomfortable, the easier it becomes. And that's something I had to, get used to. It sounds cliche, but an easy way for athletes, I think, can practice it too. If it's like, we had snow in Colorado, I'm out there running in 5-degree temperature. It's not the most comfortable, but a way that people can do it, even if it's outside of sport, is writing things down. I think that there's a really important visualization that happens if you write your fears down, because it can become this big, scary thing in your mind, the dragon, right? But then as soon as you write it down or you draw the dragon on a piece of paper, it's like, oh, this thing, like it can seem a bit less scary. So I think that's something that is like a practice, and it can be even a daily practice. It's something I do every day.
Mechanically, what do? You pull out the journal, you got a pen. Is it pen and paper or is it digital? Pen and paper.
I prefer pen and paper. Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. And so then you write on that. But are you answering a thought stem like my fears today are, or are you just free flowing? Mechanically, how do you do it?
For me, it's honestly just a check-in, right? Some days it's easier if I have something on my mind, and writing allows me to actually pinpoint what that something is. So it can really start like without like an agenda or an objective, and just writing down how I'm feeling in that moment.
Very cool. Okay.
And this is also relating to kind of my second, I really am a fan of positivity and the power of self-belief and positive self-talk. And this has come in the form of mantras that I wrote down during my recovery, and I've taken them with me today. And something that I always write is believe that your best athletic days are ahead of you. And I think you can even take out the athlete part and say, believe that your best days are ahead of you. And it's a way to keep striving for being a better person, no matter how old you are, no matter what obstacle comes your way. It's timeless. And it's something that I still believe. And it's something that's allowed me literally, if anyone is wondering, how did I do it from, being broken to racing and competing again? That's how I did it, is believing that my best athletic days were ahead of me. And that's what got me out of bed every morning and I kept trying when I was re-injured and when recovery was not linear, because it never is. That's really what got me through. And I think it can be applied to anyone, athlete or not.
That is the applied science of optimism that and you practice it by saying that. So do you write it or do you say it? Like, how do you exercise that thought pattern that you want to make automatic?
First, it starts by writing. I think there's even neuroscience studies that have shown just the act of writing something down. Someone is, I think, at least two to three times more likely to complete the task, even if they don't go back and revisit the sticky note. So writing it down is one thing, but even when you read something, you are saying it out loud in your head. So then I would take it one step forward to say it out loud.
Very cool. So, and then is it once a day, twice a day, 1,000 times a day? How do you, I know I'm down in the weeds with it, but I think your practice is uniquely yours. And I'm trying to see how I might be able to adopt it for myself.
Yeah. I mean, I think the frequency of it, I would say at least once a day. That's what I do. And the frequency increases with the more struggle that I'm experiencing.
Right, yeah.
So and I would repeat as needed.
And then you had medical expertise, you had physical therapy, kind of movement expertise. Did you have psychological support as well? Did you do internal work? You did. Mm-hmm. So you put the fullness of the best, you put the sciences together, psychological, emotional, movement, and then mechanics from a medical perspective. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then I would add to your uncomfortableness. When you do it, you get better. I just add one thing. One way to practice it is I always talk about the emotional aspect. So you're saying do it privately, and then you're saying maybe by exercising it through writing. And I'm saying you can talk about emotionally challenging things with safe people. Mm-hmm. And that's one way to do it. And a third way that is pretty mechanical, available to most people, is a cold shower. And it's not emotions, but you learn about yourself in that cold shower. Even walking to the cold shower, I have to gear up for it. So I'm speaking to myself, about the situation. And then when it's cold, am I trying to escape or am I working to be okay in it? And so all of that is work, deep work at play. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, are there other best practices for you?
I think it all relates to visualization. For me, like that, believing your best days are ahead of you, right? Yeah. I always think about this. It's weird, but I was doing this visualization of when I was really kind of deep in the recovery process of me building a house, and that it was a brick house and that every brick represented a day. And even if that brick had a crack in it or was imperfect, I would still lay it down in the foundation, knowing that each day after that, I'd put that brick around the broken one, it would reinforce it. And that I was building this house and that I didn't know what it looked like, but I knew that foundation was going to be a strong one. And I think the practices too, that to me is like having faith, not in like a greater picture, but the faith in myself that, I have the tools that I need to get through any obstacle. And it didn't matter. I was, again, not living life in avoidance of failure or in fear of failure, but, pursuing something bigger and keep on going towards success, because even if I do fail, I know that I have the tools to handle it.
Amen. That's another first principle, which you hinted at before, which is like we have the ability to adjust. If it does, it was almost like a throwaway comment. You said like, if I go for it in this first year and it doesn't work out, I'll adjust. So the ability to be able to adjust to anything provides, and I know what I just said is big, provides this deep safety. So listen, whatever's going to happen, I have this fundamental belief that I am going to be able to work towards figuring it out. I didn't say figure it out, but I'm going to be able to work towards figuring it out. And so, all right, listen, thank you. I feel like I have a better sense of who you are. Sharing your story has helped. I know what you've done. It's incredible. And then who are you working on becoming?
The simple answer would be the best version of myself. And I think about it as a recipe. I know certain things that bring out the best in myself. And it's not even running, it's just movement. Surrounding myself with a community, and for me that can be as few as, one person that, I can fully be myself with. But maybe that sounds like a cop-out, but literally breaking it down, because I know that tomorrow is not guaranteed. And so really focusing on how do I get the most out of myself this day? And adding a pinch of that, or, a cup of this each day. So I know that I'm putting my best foot forward, and I'm, trying to get the most out of myself each day.
And have you written down like, I'm at my best, or my best is, the best version of me is? Have you written that down so that it's like a bullseye that you have a target toward?
Mm-hmm. And it's also too, when I notice myself feeling off, that I need to, scale things back on one section and add a little bit more. I'm very much of an introvert. And so when I feel myself feeling imbalanced, it's like I might need a little bit more alone time. And for me, that means maybe being outside on the trails more. So yes, absolutely. I've written this down, constantly reevaluating how to get the most out of myself each day. And when I'm feeling like I'm not at my best, what is it that I can shift?
Hold on. Because you said I'm trying to get the most out of myself as opposed to be my best. So I don't want to take us into the weeds too much, but it's an interesting nuance.
It is.
And
yeah.
so how do you think about it? Like, I'm trying to be my very best, or I'm working to get the most out of myself?
I think one brings about the other.
So you're working to be.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? Like, I wrestle with this, and I'm sorry to get into the nerd weeds with it, but I wrestle with it because sometimes I think that I just need to clear away and then it emerges. And other times I feel like I have a bayonet and I just need to hack away like stuff, and I'm working my ass off to clear a pasture to finally get to, and then I go, no, my best is when I'm actually hacking away. And like so it's not like I have it completely clarified myself, but the idea of becoming your very best is a first principle as well. You've hit on 5 first principles for me. And so
I didn't study really cool. beforehand, don't worry.
No, I think, you know what I think is that most people that are in this space share a very similar language.
I think so too. And even on that nuanced, I think being is so important, because as an athlete, like, I can focus so much on doing, right? And that in itself isn't fulfilling. And that actually doing more isn't what makes me the best version of me.
You're killing me right now. I know people listening to her like, say it, Mike. Are you going to say it? So yeah, I'm going to say it. All right. So it's like doing more, being more. It's like another fundamental principle, which is the whole idea is not to do the extraordinary to be extraordinary. We'll flip that whole model, which is I need to be more and let the doing flow from there, as opposed to do more and try to be someone. So, Hillary, well, I think we got to do a project together. I think we've got to get some first principles together and do something
I would love
about
that.
carving your own path. There's something in here that I think is eloquent. And then, so what are you doing that's exciting you, that's pushing your thinking? What are you excited about that's really pushing your thinking?
Oh, so many things. I guess I can speak kind of acutely to the trail running world. Community it can take so many different forms, but to really trying to build on community and what that means for my immediate community, obviously here in Colorado, but then I'm speaking of like career, like in the world of ultra running, but then also in the world of women's sports. I started a podcast with a couple of my friends, and we kind of talk about the science behind, how to train as a female athlete, and also what that means from, existing in female athletics. So trying to create community around that. But I feel like it sounds silly, but it has so much power to it. And being around like-minded people and who practice the same ideas and the same, or whose goals are aligned in the same way as yours. I think about it as building a future, something that makes me really excited, because I mentioned my mother at the beginning of this podcast, and she is part of, she's 68, and her high school class was the first class in her high school that women were allowed to do track and field. And she has a daughter who is a professional athlete. So what I'm doing now, building this community, especially around women in athletics, I think, and really focusing on, you're stronger than you think you are, and you're more capable than you think you are. I think that's kind of building an incredible momentum and power moving forward to the future for, women pursuing these less than mainstream careers.
Awesome. We've had some legends on the podcast, Rebecca Rush, and folks that like, so I'm sure you're connected with all of those folks, but if there's anyone in our community that we can put you guys together, it'd be really fun for us as well. That being said, where can we drive folks to learn more about what you're doing, to pay attention, to be part of your community?
Yeah, thank you. So my website's a good one-stop shop for it, HillaryAllen.com, and kind of all the things that I'm involved in there are linked there. And then Instagram is always a good place to find me. I'll post all about the things I'm doing there. It's Hillygoat Climbs. So Hillary Allen, you'll find me there. Hillygoat is a nickname.
Billy Goat. Absolutely.
Exactly.
It's a good one. Yeah. So listen, you are an emblem for so much of what I've been working to try to help people understand how to live. And so thank you for being an emblem. Thank you for your time, both the insight, the clarity. Could I just maybe spend a minute and share with you how I've experienced you?
Yes, please. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. Yeah. So the introversion extroversion is really interesting, because you described introversion, but you like community, which is probably indicative of, or an indication of, a healthy balance between the two for you. I think that you are very tactile. You lead with your senses. Maybe that's now, maybe more than before, because before maybe you were more intellectual. Not saying that you've lost that capability, but you've grown this other part of you. So you've got this yin yang on both introversion, extroversion, sensory, and let's call it intellectual engagement. And then I think you plan well and you think forward in a logical, sequential way. And so you're probably relatively structured, but I don't know that to be the case. That's a little bit of a leap in there. I think you've got a nice balance as well between the external stimulus that comes in and the awareness of the internal stimulus. I think that you probably get overstimulated by the internal. Maybe you rabbit hole and thinking more than you do, and that's why you use Mother Nature and trails to clear your mind, because left to your own devices, you'd go internal and rabbit hole and maybe get circular in thinking. you're craving that counterbalance over rotation because your parents were intellectual. You didn't get away with anything, so that you've explored the emotional part in a meaningful way by writing, by talking, and by processing. And so I think you've got a balance there that's really intriguing as well. You definitely are a risk taker. You're supportive of others. So you'd be a leader that leads with positivity. I would imagine people love being around you because you make them feel safe and you make them remember that much is possible for them. And then I think that you probably, on the self-critical part, you're probably pretty sensitive to it. I didn't hear you say that you beat yourself up or whatever, but I think that you're probably the perfectionist aspect of it, you're probably pretty critical in that way on your self-talk. So that would be an interesting place to understand more. But all that being said, yeah, very cool. Yeah, very cool. Your commitment to self-discovery, your fundamental optimism, high agency, meaning that you, as an agentic person, have power in your life. And I think you've used a whole host of mental skills to be able to have command of your inner life. And so I'm wondering where I'm off, but that's my take of you in the last 90 minutes.
I think you're pretty spot on.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. I guess like what maybe, yeah, like I said, I do love community, but I think for me it looks maybe smaller than for most. And true to the introvert form, like I love big groups, but they can be exhausting, right? I need to, be nurtured, but absolutely, that's something I've really had to work on. For you mentioned the harshness on self-talk. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I focus so much on positive self-talk, because I can easily rabbit hole. And I'm surprised how quickly it can happen if I'm not, forthcoming with, with resources and positivity.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Well, listen, I'm wishing you the best. I can't wait to keep following what you're doing to see what's next for you. But let's see. I'm serious. Let's explore if there's a project, because you are absolutely the bright beacon for becoming. And so thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. I would love that opportunity. So yes, let's stay in touch. And thanks for taking the time and having me on. It's been such a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, more to come.
Okay.